Welcome, all my fellow Redskin brethren and sister. It's news that's nightly about the Redskins. Welcome to the Redskins Nightly News. I, of course, am your set man, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. Let's get to tonight's lead story. So, yesterday, there were reports galore. If you go back to Sunday, there have been steady reports pointing at Bruce Allen's departure from this organization. Now, I yesterday talked about the article from Jason LaCanfora that was released on Sunday morning. I purposefully left out, however, the biggest part of that article because Tuesdays are normally slow days for us. There is no practice. There is no podium session. So there's really not a lot unless something comes out. So I wanted to save the rest of that article, the most important part of that article. And I also wanted to dive into some of the other reasons why I have upped my percentage from 7 to 33% that Bruce Allen will no longer be a member of this organization at some point in this offseason. We've heard as early as this week, and I talked about that last week on the Redskins Nightly News, how Kevin Sheehan on his podcast had talked about and made a great point that the last time Daniel Snyder had to make this type of decision with a guy that he really didn't want to fire in that similar position, it was Vinny Serrato some decade ago, really a decade to the T essentially, in December of 2009, where he ousted Vinny Serrato at the owners' meetings, which are this week, and then hired Bruce Allen some week later. So it feels similar to that, but I don't know if that's going to happen necessarily. That's what everyone thinks is going to happen. I really think that if Bruce is gone, it's going to be on amicable terms. So I'm seeing more of a retirement thing coming. Less of, pushing him out of the door, firing him, making him look bad, or him even resigning, and more of him retiring. That's what I see coming. I still think that's Dan's homeboy, and he wants him to go out on good terms and almost kind of make it feel like, I'm not pushing you out of the door. This is what he wants to do. I don't care how it happens, personally. Could care less. I just don't want him here anymore. So let's get into the JLC story from Sunday and the most important part, which was the fact that Daniel Snyder, and I talked about this, I kind of alluded to it yesterday, and I didn't want to say too much without giving away what I really wanted to talk about, because I knew I would. I have diarrhea of the mouth sometimes, and I knew I was going to just start talking about it, and I didn't want to do that. So yesterday, I alluded to Daniel Snyder starting to get it, starting to understand the magnitude of the situation. And the biggest thing that he's starting to realize is that head coaching candidates, potential head coaching candidates, don't want to come here because of the environment, aka Bruce Allen. Okay, in order for him to attract a high-level candidate, someone that isn't a retread that is desperate to get back in, like a Rex Ryan or even a Mike McCarthy, and I'm not saying that he is a retread that's not worthy of kicking the tires on, but I just don't want him here. But guys like that are desperate to get in. The guys that are on TV, on ESPN and on Fox Sports 1 that would do anything to get their chance to get back in the league as a head coach, that are out publicly campaigning for jobs. You don't want those guys. You want the guys that are already working right now, that are comfortable staying where they are, but if a great opportunity presents itself, they would be willing to jump at it. And a guy like Eric Bieniemy, or David Shaw at Stanford. These are guys that the Redskins are considering. These are guys that they like, that they would love to interview for the job. There will be other openings available in other teams that will want these coaches. And if there are all things are considered are the same, all right? If all things considered are on a level playing field, do you think they're going to choose Washington over, say, a Dallas or a New York or a Carolina, for instance, over this job? You think they're going to take the Redskins job over those other opportunities if all things considered are pretty much equal? You've got to be a damn fool, especially if Bruce Allen is still here. So he's starting to understand that I can't get the level of coach that I'm seeking. I can't land that big fish that I'm looking to get on the hook. If Bruce Allen is here, he's starting to comprehend that. So that was the biggest part of the JLC article, that he's starting to understand that if I want to attract a major head coaching candidate, Bruce Allen can't be here. The two cannot mix. And that's the first time we've heard admission of the fact that things have to change in order to get a big name head coach here, which is what Daniel Snyder wants. He doesn't want a little fish. He doesn't want to promote from within. He doesn't want to stay status quo with Bill Callahan. He's looking to attract a major candidate here, and the only way he thinks he's going to be able to do that is moving on from Bruce, and that's the first time we've actually heard that acknowledged. So I thought that was a major piece of that article, if not the biggest piece of that article. Now, I think a lot of people also read that article and took the David Shaw piece away from it, and I talked about that yesterday. But the reason that I've upped my percentage is because of just the groundswell. It's not just one thing in particular. It's a bunch of things that I'm hearing from people that are in the know, that I trust, that have said the same thing. You know, Chris Russell wrote an article yesterday or 2 days ago, right after the game, that was called "Where There's Smoke, There's Fire." And I'm a huge proponent of that. I believe that to be the truth. Where there's smoke, there is definitely some fire. You know, I don't know how big the fire, but if I see smoke, it's probably a substantial amount of fire going on. And, you know, I've been running away from the prospects of Bruce Allen being out as Washington team president because I didn't want to set myself up for disappointment again this season. Last year, you know how I felt. I was hell-bent on him being gone. A lot of you said, bruh, he's not going anywhere. And I didn't want to believe it because it was so obvious that he and Jay needed to be gone and that they needed to start anew last season. It did not happen. I was disappointed, and I told myself I won't allow myself to be in that position again. All right? So now we fast forward to the present time, and now I talked about Kevin Sheehan, and I told you I trust him, and he's right more than he's wrong. And he's been saying it all along, and he's been adamant that he's got people on the inside that he talks to, that he trusts, that says there's no way that Bruce Allen is back after this season. And I said, okay, that's great. That got me to bump it up to 7%. But that was it. I wasn't going any further than that. And then you start hearing from guys like Chris Russell. As a matter of fact, this is what Chris Russell said the scene was after the Green Bay game. He used the phrase red hot. Just want to give you a little insight as to what he thinks is going to happen and what he said the environment was like after the Green Bay loss and the Redskins were officially eliminated from postseason contention. Take a listen.
After the game was not a pretty one. That there is, it was described as quote unquote red hot in Green Bay. Now, I keep hearing that there's no chance Bruce Allen is coming back. Just a matter of how it's going to get done and how it's going to be wrapped up. I still think he's going to retire rather than get fired. However, Lock and Four this morning said changes could be coming this week. I know there are other people that have speculated and heard the same thing. I've now been told that things could happen this week. That's not retiring. Resigning, yes. You don't retire with 3 weeks to go.
Now, Chris Russell has been pretty adamant about Bruce not being back this season, and he said he thinks it's going to end in retirement after the season is done. And you heard him say that, you know, since the Jason La Canfora report and some of the things he's been hearing of recent note, that it could easily be fast-tracked to this week. Now, like he mentioned, retirement doesn't happen 3 weeks left into the season. All right, that's a resign. But I don't know if that's the way Bruce and Dan envision Bruce going out, if he is to, in fact, go out. So I think still retirement is the more likely scenario, which would happen at the end of the season. But if Daniel Snyder wants to get this thing started sooner rather than later, then something must be done now. So we'll see if anything happens. The league meetings have started already. Today was the first day. We'll see what happens. If there's any news that comes out over the next 72 hours, the league meetings will take place today, tomorrow, and they'll wrap it up tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see if anything comes out of there over the next 24 to 48 hours. But at the end of the day, I hear from Chris Russell, and I knew where he stood, but I still wasn't convinced. Then you hear J.P. Finley, a guy that I also listen to quite often, say that the people that he talks to, and again, this is when it starts to get real for me, because the guys that are around the team all the time, they generally don't want to speak out of turn. They're a little bit apprehensive to speak indefinites because they're around the building all the time. They have to see these guys. They don't want to speak out of turn. All right. For fearing that they won't get interviews and they'll be kind of blacklisted and blackballed. So they kind of tread lightly. But when you hear guys that are around the team all the time start to talk indefinites, like J.P. Finley, who all of a sudden now, and he wasn't saying this 2 weeks ago. He wasn't even saying this last week. He started really saying that, well, I'll take it back. He started saying it kind of late last week that, hey, I do not think Bruce is going to be back. The people that I talk to, I don't think he's going to be back. Now I'm starting to say to myself, okay, JP's saying it, Chris Russell's saying it, Kevin Sheehan's saying it. And then the icing on the cake for me was, and Jason LaCanfora saying it. I don't want to leave him out because he's a major part in this as well. But then Albert Breer was on 106.7 The Fan, I think it was about a week ago. And I heard him speak, and he talked about the same thing that Jason LaCanfora talked about, which was coaching candidates don't want to come here because of the last decade under Daniel Snyder and the dysfunction that has gone on here. And he even took it a step further and said, even if Bruce Allen's gone, there's still an aura as Tom Lavero likes to say, another guy that's on the Kevin Sheehan Show podcast likes to say, there's still an aura of self-destruction in Washington that is scaring away really competent head coaching prospects. So even if Bruce isn't here, there's still that element of, Daniel Snyder's there, and where he's still been really bad at his job. This whole organization has been a mess, but a lot of people see Bruce Allen as the major problem to getting this thing turned around in Washington. And so I think that, everything starts to connect and point to Bruce Allen being on the outs. And that's why the percentage has been raised for me, because there's too much smoke for there not to be any fire. All right. When major outlets like SI start picking up this story because they're hearing things, it's one thing when the guys locally hear things. They're close, they're in it, they got sources on the inside. They should be the first ones we hear from. That has been the case. But once it starts getting outside to the national media, that's when there's starting to be a little bit of traction and it's gaining some steam. And that's why the percentage has gone up for me. This thing is real, folks. This thing is going to happen, it feels like. All right? So I feel really confident. I'm not going to allow myself to go over 33% because that would mean that I'm going to then hit that 50% threshold. And that would mean, in my mind, I'm telling myself it's going down. And I'm trying to guard against that because I still don't trust the powers that be. I don't. Okay? I still don't. There's still these different angles that could take place. Like a David Shaw could say, hey, I'll come on board, but only if Bruce Allen's here. That's my guy. I mean, and I don't know that to be the case, but I'm just throwing out a scenario in which Bruce could still be on board. And I just don't want to set myself up for that kind of disappointment. So I'm going to continue to stay at 33%, but I'm up a full 26% from my 7 that I've been on for the last 2.5, 3 weeks now. I'm up to 33%. That tells you that I'm starting to believe, as should you, that something is going to take place. And there could be major changes. And as you heard with Chris Russell, that And in that article he wrote that there's smoke, where there's smoke, there's fire. He wrote that there were a lot of Redskins team officials and coaching members that were very uneasy because they felt like there could be imminent change. As early as Monday, they thought that something could happen and their jobs could be on the line. So it's getting pretty dicey. Feels like something's about to happen. We'll see if something happens here in the immediate future. Honestly speaking, I could care less when it happens. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen 3 weeks from tomorrow. All I know is that it just needs to happen, okay? Whether it happens on Black Monday, the day after the season, or if it happens tomorrow at the league meetings, I could care less. I just want it to happen. The sooner the better, right? The sooner the better. But at the end of the day, as long as Bruce Allen isn't with this organization, isn't the team president, isn't handling any business concerning the Washington Redskins, that's all that I care about at the end of the day. So let's get to in other news. And so yesterday there were a bunch of reports, and intermingled with those reports were some reports that, according to a lot of sources, Eric Bieniemy is on the Redskins' short list of head coaching candidates, along with some of the other names that we've already heard in the past. So we can add his name to the list right now that is Mike Tomlin, David Shaw, and now Eric Bieniemy. You could also throw in Marvin Lewis. That was a name that was surfaced earlier, but I haven't been able to substantiate that. Haven't heard anybody really echoing that. I just heard that once. I've heard Eric Bieniemy in multiple locations. I've heard David Shaw in multiple locations. I've heard Mike Tomlin's name in multiple locations. So those are the only three that I can say that Daniel Snyder is fixated on and would love to have as his next head coach. We'll see if any of those candidates end up here. As I've mentioned before, the Redskins will not have the most desirable job in this offseason. The Cowboys are going to fire Jason Garrett. The Giants are going to fire Pat Shurmur. The Carolina Panthers have already fired Ron Rivera. There are a number of other openings. Jacksonville will have an opening. I'm not saying that's better than here, but that's an opening nonetheless. The Cleveland Browns could have an opening potentially with a quarterback and a group of players that are very talented. There are, as I mentioned, other jobs like Detroit with an established veteran quarterback could potentially be open. And the list goes on and on and on. We're going to see upwards of 6, possibly 7, maybe even as many as 8 openings this offseason. And easily the Redskins could be at the bottom of that list. And so I don't know if the Redskins will be able to land a guy like Eric Bieniemy. However, I love the ringing endorsement from Andy Reid. I read an article in which Andy Reid said, look, if anyone were to approach me and ask me if Eric Bieniemy were ready to be a head coach in this league, I'd say hire him now. That was a direct quote. Hire him now. He is ready. And this is a direct quote as well. He said, he's ready. He's been ready. He was ready last year. He says, ask Patrick Mahomes, who is a big influence on him. He's in those meetings with Mahomes. He's putting together game plans. He's a huge influence on Patrick Mahomes and this offense. I'd tell anybody that is looking for a head coach that Eric Bieniemy's your guy, okay? That's what Andy Reid said. That is a ringing endorsement. He said, I would hate to lose him, okay? But the guy is ready to be a head coach in this league. And so even though he doesn't call the plays, he's a part of the group that puts the game plan together, and he's the one actually calling the plays into Patrick Mahomes' helmet on game day. So Eric Bieniemy is a guy that I would absolutely love to come here because that's the kind of coach that the league is trending towards. Now, if you want to go against the grain, then you're looking for a defensive-minded guy like Mike Tomlin or Greg Williams, or hell, even a David Shaw who's a little bit more conservative in his approach. But if you're looking for what the league has turned to, it's the young coach that is offensive-minded, that you can find a defensive coordinator to marry with that offensive-minded coach. But what you fear in this league, and I've talked about this on my podcast, I've even talked about it here, is that you hire a defensive-minded head coach. You find a great offensive mind, but he gets you going in the right direction, and then he gets poached, and he becomes the head coach. And that's what you fear in this league. So to combat that, you hire the offensive mind And you bring him in and you marry him with your quarterback so that you don't have to worry about those two ever parting ways. If that guy works with your quarterback and you have a franchise guy in mind, and we do in Dwayne Haskins, you marry the two together. If they make beautiful music, you could have a Drew Brees, Sean Payton-like relationship. That's what everyone is chasing after. All right, the Browns did it to little to no success this offseason, going away from a guy that I thought should have got the job in Greg Williams and instead going with Freddie Kitchens. Why? Because he was the young offensive mind that had success the year previous as the offensive coordinator with Baker Mayfield. And so he wanted to marry the two. And it didn't work because he was a first-time head coach and he was in over his head. He was a quarterback's coach that they just kind of skipped the step in offensive coordinator and gave him a head coaching job and he wasn't ready. Bieniemy has been the running backs coach for a very long time. He then was promoted to offensive coordinator, has been in that role for the last 3 seasons, and now 2 or 3 seasons, and now he's ready. And you heard Andy Reid give him a ringing endorsement. He's ready. He's ready to become the guy. When Matt Nagy left, because he was the OC in Kansas City, Eric Bieniemy was promoted, so he's been there in that role for 2 years now, and Andy Reid feels like he's been groomed and he's ready to go. And I'd love to be the team that poaches him away from Kansas City and gets him here. But what I think it's going to take is the dismissal of Bruce Allen first, and then some reassurance that you're in control and that, and you know what I would really like to see happen? I would like to see the Redskins do this the right way. I would like them to promote from within first, all right? I would like to see them promote to GM, all right? And then have that GM say, I want Eric Bieniemy. That's what I would like to see happen, all right? That's what I would like to see them do. I'd like to see them do this the right way. And I don't know if that's going to take place or not, but that's how I would prefer it to be done. And if we can do that and then hire Bieniemy, he can hire his staff, and whether Kevin O'Connell is here or not, doesn't really matter to me at this point. He may go on to be a wonderful coach. And if he's here, great. If he's not, it is what it is. If you hire an offensive-minded guy, I think that spells the end of Kevin O'Connell here as the offensive coordinator. If you hire a defensive-minded guy like a David Shaw or a Mike Tomlin, for instance, or Ron Rivera even, then I think a guy like Kevin O'Connell then gets an opportunity to stay here and really make this offense his own. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, what the Redskins decide to do. But one thing's for sure, they are starting to really look towards the future. And if I have it my way, they would promote from within. So Kyle Smith would be the guy I promote. I know some of you love Doug Williams. Doug Williams' title is actually higher than that of GM. So for whatever it's worth, I think the title that he has isn't even worth the piece of paper that it's on. However, Doug Williams has proven that he's got an eye for talent. So I'd love for him to stick around. I'd love for Kyle Smith to be elevated to GM. All right. And I'd love for him to say, you know what? I want Eric Bieniemy. Let's go get him. And I'd love for Bieniemy to interview for the job, love this situation, want to come here. Because at the end of the day, I want a guy that wants to be here. I don't want a guy that just wants to be back in the league and doesn't care where. I want a guy that actually wants to be here. And I hope Bieniemy wants to be here. He takes the job, and then he starts bringing in talented guys to work with him on this staff. And then we start seeing some changes being made, and then we start seeing the Redskins go out, attract free agents that fit what Bieniemy wants to do, and then they start attacking the draft with vigor and bringing some guys that fit what this organization wants to be about moving forward. And you're going to see some turnover. If Kyle Smith is able to get the reins, look, a lot of those guys that are here, he has some kind of input in, whether he disagreed or agreed. But if he takes over as GM, you're going to see maybe some turnover. There may have been a couple of guys in here that Bruce wanted that he didn't necessarily believe in, but his voice wasn't big enough. And now these guys will be moved on from. It'll be interesting to see if this roster has a little bit of turnover, if somebody from the outside comes in, or if a guy like Kyle Smith gets the opportunity to be the guy and now has a chance to put his thumbprint on this roster. It'll be interesting to see if there is some turnover on some guys that have been here, but maybe have been dead weight or aren't performing to his standards, or he never really liked in the first place, but Bruce Allen wanted them here. And so now he has a chance to use a little bit of power and authority to move on from some of those guys. It'll be interesting to see what happens, whether we promote from within or we bring an outsider in to the organization. It'll be interesting to see what the Redskins decide to do. But in any event, very interesting times, as I think something is bound to happen. Don't know what is bound to happen yet, but it seems like something is going to happen sooner rather than later. But what I do want to do is get to some comments real quick, because I feel like there were some really interesting comments that were left on yesterday's show. And so I want to read a couple of them quickly and react to a few of them. So Jonathan Lynch says, I have a question to ask you. Your thoughts on Darius Geis on being hurt again, and if you would be upset if the Redskins drafted a running back in next year's draft in the 2nd to the 5th round. Thanks, he says. You know what? I wouldn't be disappointed in that. Now, if Adrian Peterson is going to be back, then I don't know if that's the move the Redskins need to be making. But if you are going to just go all young, Bryce Love, Darius Geis, and a third young back, and then keep a guy like Wendell Smallwood for special team purposes on this roster to fill that backup Bryce Love role, then I wouldn't have a problem with them drafting a back. Now, if you're going to keep Adrian Peterson on this roster, then I think that you could draft another back, but he would need to be in the Bryce Love mold, in that kind of third down, scat back type of role, so that if something were to happen to Bryce Love, you would have another guy that will be able to fill that. Because a lot of people, including myself, think that Bryce Love isn't just a third down back. If something were to happen to Darius Geis, I think Bryce Love could easily fill in for him and be a first and second down back. And then you would have another guy on the roster that you drafted that you like as a third down type of back. So I would not be opposed to the Redskins selecting a back in this draft in that third down type of mold, because I think in Bryce Love, you have a guy that could potentially be a 3-down back. So it'll be interesting to see what the Redskins decide to do at the running back position. But I do think that is something to keep in mind with the injury history of one Darius Geis. Let's see. This is a comment that just was funny to me. I just wanted to read it. Hylas Dory II says, man, DG, hell when well, but hell, he's never well. Oh, well. I thought that was funny because it's so apt. Anyway, I wanted to move on to a couple more comments. Willie Flowers says, our tight end is in Chicago, J.P. Holtz, just balled out against Dallas. 1 step forward, 5 steps back. I don't know if you guys were paying attention, but J.P. Holtz, a guy that I wanted to keep because I felt like he was a guy that should have been on this roster. I thought the Redskins should have put Jordan Reed on the short-term IR when the season started. They knew he wasn't going to be back. That was a hellacious concussion that he got in the 3rd week of the preseason. I didn't think he was going to be back until probably week 4 or 5 at the earliest. So I thought they should have put him on the short-term IR or the PUP list so he would miss the first 6 weeks of the season. Either way, that was going to allow you a roster spot for J.P. Holtz. Instead, they kept him active way too long. I mean, they were holding up a roster spot, and that made them have to cut a guy like J.P. Holtz. And look, he can't run block, and I think that's part of the reason he didn't make this team. But he can catch the football. I liked him in the preseason, and I thought he was a guy that should have been here, but it is what it is. Let's see. I wanted to also read this comment here. Daddy Smoke Yam says, yesterday I alluded to the Redskins not having a coverage safety and that it's maddening. He says, Monte can definitely cover tight ends. Problem is they usually line him up on the strong side of the field, so it ends up being Landon's responsibility. It's a huge flaw on our part. And while I agree with that assessment that Landon is usually put in those situations, when's the last time we saw Monte in coverage? I don't think it's been since his rookie season we've seen Monte in coverage on a consistent basis. I just don't know if I trust Monte to do that job anymore. At one point, I was so ecstatic. The reason I was so high on Monte Nicholson was because he did have that coverage element. And we haven't seen that since, dare I say, the Oakland Raiders Sunday night game where he had a pick, where he was in coverage. And even then he was kind of, playing free safety, but we haven't seen him be in position very often. I just don't feel like we have that guy on the roster right now. I don't know. He could be, but they're not putting him in positions to succeed. So there's that. This is one that I wanted to read as well. Jarrett Bailey writes, I disagree with your take on Shaw. He says, I don't care how we win. Just win, baby. A superior run game would only give McLaurin more chances, especially one-on-one. Draft a tight end, beef up the O-line, and bring him in here. Dominate the run, keep the other offense off the field, get Terry in winnable matchups, play up to our potential on defense, and I'll take 21 to 14 wins all day. Every day. Shaw has the intangibles you look for in a leader. He's a winner. Don't buy the BS that you have to have a gunslinger to win in today's NFL. I agree with everything he said, except the fact that you have to have the ability to throw the football consistently in your arsenal. And I haven't felt that way about David Shaw coached teams. They've relied heavily on the run. And if they get down in a game 17 or 21 to 3, it's tough for them to rally back because they're so reliant on the run game. Now, I agree with everything you said about running the football. That will set up play action fake and get one-on-one matchups for guys like McLaurin and possibly Richardson if he's healthy, and any other guy that can run on this team, Steven Sims as well. I agree with the fact that shortening the game gives you a chance to keep the other team's offense off the field. We still don't trust our defense. And so anytime you can keep them off the field, it's a win for us. But at the same time, you got to be able to throw the football in this league. We've seen teams that play great defense and run the football have to score in order to win. You saw the Super Bowl. Every year the Super Bowl seems like it's a shootout, except for last year. Last year was 10-3. And that was a great defensive struggle. But both of those teams were fully capable of throwing the football. Part of the reason they got to the Super Bowl was because they could throw the football. See the championship games the week previous where both teams were on the road and had to go into hostile environments and throw the football to win. The Patriots in Kansas City and the Rams in New Orleans in the Dome. You have to be able to throw the football to win in this league. And yes, if you can run it in a dominant fashion, that will go a long way in helping you win, but you also have to be able to throw it consistently. And I haven't seen that from David Shaw coached football teams, but you never know. I'm just not a huge proponent of him being here, but I do think he's a hell of a football coach. And I've already stated as much. Anyway, I thought that was a great comment there from Jarrett Bailey. Again, I told you guys, we don't have to agree. We're all here for the same purpose and goal. We may have different visions and ways of getting there, but we're all here for the same thing. And this is the last comment I want to read right here. Andrew Thompson says, in my opinion, Dwayne has looked best running the up-tempo stuff. Be great to see him before we have to do it at the end of the game. That may be too outside of old Bill's comfort zone for him to sign off on. And it was funny because they brought it up at the presser yesterday to Bill about how good and comfortable Dwayne's looked in the 2-minute offense. And he said, have you guys even entertained that thought of doing that during the course of the game and not waiting until the last 2 minutes of any given half to see him in that kind of offensive tempo? And again, similar to the Steven Sims on punt, it sounded like that was a novel concept, like that was the first time he had heard it. He was like, yeah, that actually sounds like something that we could do. It didn't sound like he had actually thought of that yet. It's crazy. Again, he can't be the coach. I have to reiterate that he can't be the coach here. Anyway, great comments. Keep them coming. I appreciate those. Love reading them. And I insist that you continue to leave those comments in the comment section, as I enjoy reading every single one of them. Like this video, subscribe to the Louie T Network if you haven't already done so. Check out the Louie T Network podcast if you haven't done that. Share this video if at all possible. I think you guys remember, we've got skin in the game. Why? Because we're Redskins fans for life. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Remember, tomorrow we will be live. Open phone lines, open social media. I'll have it all going tomorrow, and we will have a tremendous show opened to the public so you guys can talk about things that interest you. Draft, Bruce Allen, coaching search, free agency, whatever tickles your fancy will all be on the table tomorrow. Looking forward to that. And let's set the time at 8 p.m. tomorrow evening. So look for a live Redskins nightly news tomorrow. Looking forward to doing that with you guys. In the meantime, this has been the Redskins Nightly News. I am your man, Louie T, signing off. You guys have a great evening. See you tomorrow.
Louie T Network.